I'm Hanson Hosein. Welcome to Media Space from our studio at Adobe University in Seattle's Fremont neighborhood. Our show seeks out the collision points between society and technology. We talk to creative thinkers on the hot-button issues of our digital age. Together, we'll find out how these entrepreneurial leaders are changing our lives right now and what's next. In this episode, Eric Liu says the 21st century demands a new kind of leader. It's a monumental shift caused by a demand for good citizenship and by disruptive digital technologies. That's precisely the focus of Eric's Guiding Lights Weekend. It's a high-profile conclave of leaders who seek innovative, community-based solutions. He's no stranger to leadership himself. Before he turned 30, Eric earned a Harvard Law degree, served as Bill Clinton's speechwriter, and had a brief shining career as a national TV news personality. But it's here in the Pacific Northwest that Eric has found his sense of place. Are we breeding a different kind of leader here? And what's Eric's recipe for what he calls our special civic sauce? We'll also bring you into our discussion. Use the Twitter hashtag FOUR, Peaks, P-E-A-K-S, and we'll track your questions. Eric, welcome.
Hanson, it's great to be here.
Well, with this remarkable book, and it really is a remarkable book, 7 years ago you wrote this, and you've now created this Guiding Lights network to foster what you think is a new kind of leader. So you got to tell me here, so what do we need? What kind of leader do we need for the 21st century?
Well, Guiding Lights, the book, started out being about great life-changing leaders, mentors, teachers from many different walks who didn't necessarily speak the same language. Some might be from business, from technology, from the military, from the arts world. But when you scratch beneath the surface, you realize they have all the same common DNA about how to move people and how to inspire people. And so I spent a couple of years on the road meeting these remarkable guiding lights, and when I finished the book, we created this Guiding Lights Weekend gathering where people like the ones in the book, but many, many others come together to really exchange notes and play out of silo, right? I mean, so much of what goes on, why you have Media Space here, is that people play deep into their silo, and there isn't a lot of opportunity in structured ways for us to get out of that. And for me, one of the dimensions of leadership that we need to foster right now is just that. The ability to cross-pollinate, the ability to think outside of silo and outside of discipline, and to learn how to translate the way you speak leadership into the way someone else might speak leadership. That's one. I think another dimension of it fundamentally is that it is this notion of leader as servant and leader as learner, and fundamentally leader as listener. I think so much, a lot of my time in the other Washington in DC was about a notion of public leadership that is about projecting and communicating and directing and inspiring perhaps, but not so much about listening. And one of the many ways in which life over the last decade plus in Seattle has changed me is that it's just shifted everything almost upside down, so that fundamentally everything begins with how and whether you're willing to tune in to where other people are and read where a community is, get a sense of what is happening organically, and as a leader, in a sense, to be led by that. Now, it doesn't mean just to become an exquisitely tuned follower, but it does mean to really recognize that listening is, I think, 80% of great leadership, understanding what people are feeling about a topic, not just what they're saying, understanding what's not being said, what's not being put on the table. And we'll talk about some concrete examples, but for me, that is the essence of what we're trying to do at Guiding Lights Weekend, is to foster a sense of civic participation and engagement that is about that kind of leadership and that kind of listening.
Does that need for tuning in, that kind of listening, this modernization of what leadership truly is, does that come specifically from this culture that you've surrounded yourself with here in Seattle in the last few years, or does technology play a role in this as well? Because even in our program, we say that social media really has forced us to be into a more in tune, open way of leadership.
Mm-hmm. I think the technology side is everything that's kind of a commonplace now. It flattens hierarchy. It makes leadership and social organization itself just much more networked and horizontal, right? And it makes you think about how to make change in a much more horizontally scaled rather than vertically scaled way. That said, there are dimensions of life in the Northwest here that are absolutely unique and blessed and powerful. And I think they've shaped me. I think they've shaped you in the way that you move in the world. And one of them for me is just this idea that, I've talked about this before, but how you define your place in society is so much a function of the metaphors you use in everyday life, right? In our politics, in our business life, in our culture today, we still operate fundamentally in this country around a metaphor of the machine. The machine is still the dominant thing, the dominant story we use, right? And whether it's political machines, business machines, military machines, marketing machines. We think about ourselves as cog in a machine, or maybe as regulator of the machine, or director of the machine, or maybe mechanic. But being in Seattle has just completely changed my imagination and the way that I see things. And to me, the dominant metaphor of what it means to be in public life, to live in public, is not the machine, it's the garden. It's the ecosystem. It is this thing that is not a top-down, mechanistic, imperfect equilibrium sort of thing, but rather a wild, uncontrollable, organic ecosystem that grows on its own in many ways, but requires fundamentally a gardener, requires us to tend, to weed, to seed, and to feed. And if you think about our role in civic life, just as citizens, not as leaders, right? Just as everyday neighbors and friends and folks living our lives, thinking like gardeners is so much of what makes, I think, Seattle special, and so much of what I think we have to offer to export to the rest of the country about civic life.
And that's what's interesting to me about this conversation that you've sparked around machine brain versus garden brain. Garden brain may indeed be endemic to this particular region, and we're seeing how machine brain, in a way, is failing elsewhere. I mean, if we look specifically to what's been happening in the Middle East in the last few months, could we go as far as saying that that is sort of our archetype for 20th century leadership, the strong man in control, top-down leadership, and all of a sudden it's beginning to founder because it's very much a machine brain approach to leadership versus, say, if we exported this kind of Seattle garden brain leadership?
Absolutely. I think that is, totally what's happening. And one of the things, if you think about the Middle East, or heck, if you think about Wisconsin right now, right, is not just the breakdown of that kind of top-down command and control way of doing business, but the contagion spirit of change. Right? What happened in Egypt, what's happening in the Middle East still right now, was not particularly directed by any single person. This was the classic, one more grain of sand led the sand pile to collapse.
Well, that
right?
begs the question then, do we actually still need leaders if these headless organizations can form out of nowhere and create incredible social change?
I believe fundamentally that we do, because that kind of undirected network change is really great at taking down structures, right? And sometimes it can be really good at creating structures, but again, the metaphor of the garden is apt, right? If you just let a garden grow and you're hands off about it, it will grow like gangbusters for a while. All kinds of stuff will bloom, right? But after a bit, one particularly noxious weed, a dandelion or something, will take root and it will take over if you let it be. And that growth will grow until that dandelion takes over and the garden falls apart and dies, right? You need to weed. You need to tend. You need to be intentional about what is it that we want in this garden, right? That's very different from being a strong man, boss of a machine, right? It is recognizing that you have some control in terms of your intentionality of what kinds of things, what sorts of fruits you want to sprout from your society, but then you have very little control over how they grow, how quickly they grow, and in what ways.
So are there any core values that you would identify right off the top of your head that says, this is the kind of leader we need now, given the circumstances and context we face in our world?
Core values?
Yes.
Well, I think one of the...
Or competencies.
Yeah. Well, that's actually one of the great competencies, I think, is to have core values, right? I mean, it's why I asked you the question. And I think there's a lot in the culture right now of leadership as technocratic management, right? And that doesn't cut it for me. Leadership has to be driven fundamentally by what do you believe and why? What is your sense of core values? What is your sense of purpose? What is your sense of greater obligation to a good other than your own?
That
right?
leads to a certain level of authenticity, it sounds to me, because if you know what your core values are and those values come out in the way that you lead, people will embrace you more because they sort of see that personality, authenticity coming through in your leadership.
Absolutely. I'll just give you a concrete example. I've just finished teaching this quarter at the University of Washington Law School the seminar for the first time called Lawyers as Leaders. And about half the students are US-born JD students, and about half of them are foreign-born LLM students, one-year master's degree students. And it's just been fascinating to get this rich, very, not just multicultural, but international dialogue about what leadership means, right? First of all, law students and lawyers are, as a block, not encouraged generally to think of themselves as leaders. And so the first thing we have to kind of get through in a seminar like this is whether you like it or not, whether you asked for it or not, you are a leader, right? This is true of anybody, I think, but this is particularly true of someone who ends up with a law degree and goes into a community and by dint of that profession, someone's going to say, oh, well, you know, Hanson, he's got a law degree. Why don't we ask him to figure this out?
That's a big mistake.
That's a big mistake. Right? Yeah. I'm not saying it's always justified, but I'm saying people will, like it or not, you know, turn toward you. And so the first thing is just to get people to see themselves, whatever their station, whatever their formal title, whatever their writ of actual authority may be, to recognize that they have that capacity to lead. It may be in a very small way. It may be only in the circle of the LLM program at the UW, right? It may be in the circle of the Chinese legal community in Beijing. It may be in the circle of something else, but you can be catalytic in that way, right? And so number one is recognizing that you have this capacity. Number two is asking yourself, what do I believe and why? Right? And this is what's been fascinating, because I don't think any of my students had particularly, you know, they're into their 20s and 30s, some of them maybe even older. I don't know that any of them had ever been asked, what do you believe and why? What are your core values? What are the norms that you hold dearest in terms of how you try to guide your life, how you try to mentor and teach others, how you try to raise a family? And just being asked to articulate that was itself for these students a little bit of a revelation. And then it's just you know, encouraging them to go out and do stuff and change. And we started with the little laboratory of the UW Law School itself. Go and find a thing that needs doing in the UW Law School to change the culture of this place so that it's more oriented toward leadership. And they've come up with a dozen different great little ideas. None of them is on the scale of Middle East change, but all of them you know, activate that same spirit of, wow, I can be catalytic, and wow, I can make that contagious, and wow, people are listening to me, and wow, I'm listening to them, and something's growing here. Like that itself is a very powerful awakening.
So how are you doing as a leader, according to your own criteria?
I think I'm good on mindfulness. I think I'm pretty clear on what my core values are. I think I'm still always, you know, I give myself a C+ on always practicing what I preach. I think it's...
I wish most leaders in our world were as equally critical of themselves.
And it's just, you know, in little ways, you know. I mean, I think as much as I talk about the garden, when, you know, as we sit here today, we're about 2.5 weeks out from Guiding Lights weekend. And the closer we get to putting on this huge national event, the more my brain goes to machine brain, and I want to control the levers and make the, you know, rather than gardener brain. And it's like, look, let it grow, let it happen, right? And I think this is a word that I use in a lot of other contexts, and I use it very deliberately: practice, right? When I talk to my law students about practicing law, I mean, or when I talk in the context of imagination, about practicing imagination, I really mean this idea that, you know, awareness of yourself as a leader, the activation of imagination, the awakening of compassion, these aren't things that you kind of take a pill and get, or that you do once and you got it, right? It is a matter of continuous mindful practice that ends up playing itself out in almost tiny daily choices. How you show up, and, you know, whether you, how you encounter somebody who bumps into you in the street, how you engage in conversation with someone unexpected. It's not the big public moments, but it's the aggregation of lots of tiny private moments.
An interesting corollary to leadership, and something that you truly do emphasize during Guiding Lights weekend, is this notion of mentorship. What I found most interesting, especially your motivation for even writing this book, is that you had a Harvard law degree. You worked for Bill Clinton as an advisor and as a speechwriter. You were doing really well, collecting badges, as you said. But for some reason, you felt compelled to go out on the road for a couple of years to look for mentors. Why does somebody as accomplished as you so early in life need that guidance still, or needed that guidance then?
Yeah, well, I think this is, your question reveals, I think, one of the great conflations that happens in American life. We conflate the idea that there's a thing called success, right, and the idea that I'm responsible for that success, right? And so if I'd collected all those gold stars and merit badges, Harvard Law, White House, blah, 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 right, that must have been because I was a great person, right? Well, all along the way, there were, in fact, people who shaped me, who formed me, right, who guided me. But I had reached a point when I set out to write Guiding Lights where I'd realized, wow, I've collected just about every gold star I wanted to collect. And I looked around and realized there's no one really looking out for me. I am under no one's wing in particular here. And I am far too much for my comfort and my taste feeling like a quote-unquote self-made man right now, right? And I put that in quotes because I believe fundamentally there is no such thing. There's no such thing and never has been as a self-made man or woman, right? Every one of us is formed by others. Every one of us is shaped for good or for ill by mentors and other teachers, right? But America in particular, we mythologize the self-made man. We mythologize the rugged individual. And when I'd reached this point, and it was about, I don't know, I was about 30, I think, and realized that I'd gotten all these, reached this point, and I'd recently become a father, too, at that time. And I think that was one of the big turning points as well, recognizing that, wow, I now have a storehouse of experience that it's my turn to pass on to somebody else, but who's guiding me, right? And I think this is what happens to all of us. It doesn't matter how much accomplishment you have. It doesn't matter how outwardly stable, secure, successful, whatever. Everybody finds moments where they are lost. And everybody's lives are shot through with failure. And everyone has moments where they are just yearning for somebody to show them the way. And what we don't have most of the time is permission to actually express that, either to ourselves, let alone in the company of others. And when Guiding Lights Weekend first began, it was really much more focused than it is today, just on that individual activation of that kind of opening of your heart, that willingness to connect with others and say, I need help. I've reached a point where I've kind of maxed out what I can do by my own wits. I need help. And now, year over year, as Guiding Lights Weekend has grown, in a very organic way, it's gone from just me to you and me to now maybe the three of us, right? To how is our relationship situated into a larger community? What are the opportunity gaps that exist in this community? Who's here at Four Peaks today? Who's not here at Four Peaks today? Who's in Guiding Lights Weekend? Who's not there? And you start to take a bigger, concentric circle view of things. But fundamentally, it still gets down to what we all owe one another and how we all kind of pick each other up.
So you were lost, and then you were found, and you left one Washington for another Washington, and you started at Real Networks as an executive, and you didn't really have a foundation in this region, but it seems to me that you built yourself a network quite quickly. How did you go about establishing yourself here?
Well, I'll tell you this, I didn't go about establishing myself, right? I wasn't conscious of wanting to do that. And there are some people for whom that might actually be a decent strategy. I'm not a planful person that way. I don't sit down and say, okay, it's 2011, this year I'm going to expand my network in the following arenas, right? I'm not even making fun of that. I mean, I think there are some people who do that and do that well, and it works for them. That's just not me. I am powered, for better and for worse, by curiosity, insatiable curiosity. And I'm wired to always want to connect dots, right? So I meet someone who teaches at Bellevue College, and then I see you, and I think, wow, well, what might they have in common? And I think about someone else, and that's just when you're wired that way, and you're curious, you end up having a lot of conversations with people where you can be a great dot connector, right? And I think that's been one way that I've managed to get more involved in the community. Is just that that's one thing. The second thing I would say, Hanson, I think this goes to so much of what you do at the University of Washington, and your digital media program is sort of foundationally built on. It's story, right? The way that when I activate my curiosity, it's often around a story, right? What's your deal? How did you get here, right? I mean, I wish we could flip seats here and I could just interview you.
You've done that already.
I know, but not for this group here. I mean, you've got an amazing story, right? And just how it is that you came here, and the different elements, from being a war correspondent to doing this to being a filmmaker and all these things. Like, my just throwing out those three words has already lit up a bunch of minds in this room, right? And they're imagining new things. They're seeing you in a different light. They're imagining a relationship with you now that is different from just 6 seconds ago.
I look better in a flak jacket than I do in a sports jacket.
Yeah.
Well, I think, let's just break for a minute. Yeah. And when we return, do we need another Space Needle? We're back with Eric Liu. Eric, a few questions from our participants here. I think you've written a little bit about this, but how has being an Asian American shaped you as a leader?
That's a great question. I think in a couple of ways. I grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York, right outside of Poughkeepsie, in the 70s and 80s, in an environment that was very tolerant, but probably overwhelmingly white. I mean, there were very few people of color of any community. There was a certain Chinese community because Poughkeepsie was an IBM town, and there was a lot of Chinese American IBMers there. But I grew up, and I wrote about this in my first book called The Accidental Asian, about
Love
kind
that
of
title.
well, just and the accident in that title is not realizing till later, right? Well into my college years, the ways in which I had so internalized a notion of normal that was based on living in an overwhelmingly white environment, right? And having in some ways to deprogram that, in other ways to try to tease out what's race and what's class, right? And so I think one way that being Asian American has shaped me is just being, maybe this has something to do with my listening. I'm very attentive to my environment around me. When you are a minority, when you are an assimilating minority, or someone trying to wrestle with how much to assimilate, how much not to assimilate, how much to hold on to of your original heritage, how much not to, your antennae are always on, really, sensitively, right? And you're reading social situations in a certain way. I think that's shaped me to some extent. I think the other, quite frankly, and this is the more social message of The Accidental Asian rather than the more personal one, is one of the great important things about Asian Americans becoming more and more active, more and more prominent in public life in roles, whether it's media, celebrity, sports, politics, you name it, is that it starts breaking down this notion that we have in America that race is both literally and figuratively black and white, right? That there are other categories, and that indeed perhaps the very idea of categories is beginning to become suspect, right? And I think being Asian American has made me very wary of people telling me there's only binary choices, right? And you're either with us or against us.
Right.
I don't respond well to you're with us or against us, right?
Yeah.
I don't respond well to you have two choices, and I think that maybe is partly my wiring, but I think it's partly being Asian American as well. The third and final thing I'd say, not growing up, but being formed in Seattle this last 11 years now, is, Seattle is a really unique community in so many ways, but particularly in the nature of its Asian American community. Because Seattle is a very Asian city, certainly compared to lots of places around on the East Coast, but Seattle has just enough Asian Americans so that when we, of different ethnicities and backgrounds, band together and pool together, the Asian American community as a block has force, has political voice, has cultural impact, right? But we don't have enough Asian Americans here in this region so that any one ethnic group, the Chinese or the Koreans or the Japanese, can split off on their own and really do their own thing, right? You go to LA, you go to San Francisco, I mean, it's not just the Chinese community, right? It's the Hong Kong Chinese, the Taiwan Chinese, the mainland Chinese.
So not enough critical mass here to essentially become too much of a monolithic block. You have to sort of play with everybody else to make things happen.
We have just enough and not so much that, just enough to create coalition, right? And I think it really forms a sensibility of coalition. This is true now one scale up across different communities of color, right? There is a much stronger multiracial coalition building tradition here in this region than there is in a lot of cities of comparable size and scale. And back to your original theme of leadership, that's partly about the demographics and the numbers and the what will happen naturally, but it's also fundamentally about a generation ago, 40 plus years ago, there was a group of they called them the Four Amigos, right? People like Larry Gossett, still now in the King County Council, Roberto Maestas, who passed away last year, Bernie Whitebear, Uncle Bob Santos, still kicking in the international district. Those leaders 30 plus years ago, they decided that they were going to change the story in Seattle and that they were going to lock arms. They were not going to go off their own way, doing their own thing, African Americans here, Asian Americans there. And so I think this spirit of coalition is something that being Asian American in Seattle has really, it's seeped into me.
Well, and speaking of Seattle's story, I mean, we have this image up here of the Space Needle and very much the iconic image of what people from the outside see as Seattle. We know there's other things, but you're on the 50th anniversary committee as we're looking at the 50th anniversary of the World Expo site, which is Seattle Center now. You keep saying how you were formed by Seattle in the couple of decades that you've been here now. You're now in your second decade. As you think about icons that sort of shape and inspire as we move forward for our region, this was part of the space race, resources, physical infrastructure that was being built in the 60s. What would you like to see happen now that really defines us and continues to inspire us as a region?
I would like to see a form of, a web platform or a form of social media that is just flickering every few seconds or every few minutes between your face, my face, your face, your face, your face here, that it is not about the big iconic physical things that we create anymore, right? It is not about kind of thrusting forward in some kind of institutional way, but it is about activating every single person who's already in the community, actually getting folks to take stock of the amount of social capital that is sitting here unspent, untapped in every one of our households and communities, and figuring out how to activate that. So the next 50, which is what the name is for this celebration for Seattle Center and the celebration of the World's Fair, the piece of it that I'm involved in and that you are as well is on civic action, right? And in 2012, there will be 6 months of celebration to commemorate the 6 months of the World's Fair 50 years ago. And the final month, October 2012, will be on this theme of civic engagement. And our committee has just come up with a couple of ideas for big legacy projects, but what we really want to do, and how each of those big projects were conceived, is to activate people where they live.
Sounds like a network of virtual pea patches.
Yes, absolutely. And real pea patches, right? So one of the projects that we've just settled on as a committee, and that we'll be talking about more publicly, but I'll give you guys a little preview here, is creating a sister neighborhoods program in Seattle, right? So we have sister city programs. Seattle's sister cities with, I don't know what cities in Italy and Korea and what have you, and but in Seattle, just getting folks in Georgetown to get to know folks in Ballard, getting folks in Queen Anne to spend time with people in Columbia City, right? Just creating, and not just kind of, let's have dinner, but actually getting to understand what's going on. It may be around pea patches. It may be around other things.
And you think there's a digital solution to at least help enable some of that as well?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things I see you guys have brought up this great, this is one picture in my head when you ask, what's the icon? This happens to be the part of the picture of the luminaries who are going to be speaking at Guiding Lights Weekend, people from all around the country who are going to be leading really interesting workshops. And many of them are from our region, some are from around the country. But for me, what I would like to see is not another Space Needle. It's just that at Seattle Center, there's a continuous flow of faces like this. You can touch any one of these and hear the story and understand that this person is involved, maybe in a small way, with a pea patch on their block, maybe in a small way with a block watch, maybe in a small way with creating one of those walking buses where a whole group of parents walk their kids to school every day. And you realize, wow, that's the way that this person's being a great citizen. And we're going to honor that, and we're going to put it up there. We're going to make that part of the story we tell of ourselves and not have that live in isolation, right? To me, that is, I get really excited imagining a Seattle where that is happening as a matter of course, where we're all taking ownership and all recognizing a very simple precept, which is society becomes how you behave, right? It's just about you. If you choose to be civil when you're in a hurry and let someone into traffic or not, society will become just how you choose to behave there.
Which is very Gandhi-esque. It's be the change you want to see.
Absolutely, but it's also, in a sense, Confucian too. I mean, it is that there are reverberating effects here, right? And the idea, it is very against a long-held American story that as long as I'm not hurting anybody else, I can do whatever I want, right? And if I do choose to do a bad thing, that's fine, because in the end it'll be canceled out by someone's good thing, right? And that the American way in business and politics is for this Darwinian notion of everybody looks out in a most selfish way, and somehow a million acts of selfishness add up magically to a greater good, right?
1,000 points of light.
Yeah, well, that's a story we tell ourselves, right? Yeah. And I think now going into the third year of these hard economic times, we recognize that's not a story that really works, and Seattle has a better story to tell.
I think it's a fabulous way to conclude this show, and I thank you very much for sharing those thoughts with us. For our live viewers, the show is actually not over. Stay with us right here for Four Peaks Salon. Eric and other salon participants will discuss what kind of civic innovation we need to ensure our region's social prosperity. Thank you all for joining us today at Adobe's campus here in Fremont. Tune in again next month online and on air for our next episode of Media Space. I'm Hanson Hosein.